in the BRICS, which goes between Russia all the way up to Iran. And anyways, the bottom line is trade routes are very, very significant. And not only when you shut down Straits of Hormuz, and bomb the largest oil refinery in the world at Saudi Aramco, you're strangling free movement of the majority of the oil movement, at least for a good portion of the world. And it will create higher inflation. It will create higher prices. It will create delays. It will have reverberations around the globe, certainly. Well, it makes sense, and certainly also when you impact the global price of oil, you are definitely messing with the global economy. There will be some consequences that are unintended in this that we have yet to even begin to understand. Unjust or immoral, or we shouldn't have been a part of, other than World War II, which wasn't my lifetime, you could argue. And when we got out of World War II, the people who fought that war, in my mind, were the greatest generation that ever walked the earth. I mean, in terms of, at least here in the United States. Well, everything, it doesn't matter what product that you produce if you can't ship it because it's blocked. You know, that's how you see all sorts of problems. I look at what happened during COVID. Silver went to negative $40 a barrel. I mean, oil, went to negative $40 a barrel. How the hell does that happen? Because it was issues with delivery protocol, where they were all lined up in the Gulf of Mexico, that they couldn't get into the facilities. And so that's a weird way of looking at the distortions that can be created. Look at the BRICS. What did the BRICS focus on in building their unity, and the Belt Road Initiative that China has used? What they focus on are two things. One, countries that are natural resource rich and underdeveloped, but two, that possess strategic trade routes, either on land or by sea. And in particular, by sea, the trade routes are very, very important. The U.S. Navy is the entity that has forever patrolled these trade routes to create safety for all nations using these trade routes. But a lot of the routes that are being created now, the U.S. Navy really won't have access to. In particular, those like the North, I think it's called the North-South corridor in the BRICS, which goes between Russia all the way up to Iran. And anyways, the bottom line is trade routes are very, very significant. And not only when you shut down Straits of Hormuz, and bomb the largest oil refinery in the world at Saudi Aramco, you're strangling free movement of the majority of the oil movement, at least for a good portion of the world. And it will create higher inflation. It will create higher prices. It will create delays. It will have reverberations around the globe, certainly.
Rising geopolitical tensions are adding another layer of instability to the global economy. Military spending has increased sharply across multiple regions, including Europe, where governments are expanding defense budgets amid growing security concerns. These developments raise fears of broader conflict and economic disruption. Historically, periods of heightened geopolitical risk tend to trigger volatility in financial markets and commodity prices. Investors often begin shifting toward assets perceived as more resilient during crisis periods. As political uncertainty grows, global markets must grapple with the possibility that military conflict, trade disruptions, and financial instability could intersect in ways that significantly reshape economic conditions worldwide.
Well, it makes sense, and certainly also when you impact the global price of oil, you are definitely messing with the global economy. There will be some consequences that are unintended in this that we have yet to even begin to understand, but I think it's an interesting strategy, one that they have. I don't think any of us were expecting what they did to start bombing all of these other countries in their area.
Yeah. But
that's exactly what they've done, and it will create some consequences that we have yet to even begin to think in our minds that that's possible. Everything that's happened over the last several years seems to come out this way, where there are these consequences. And I think that's one of the reasons that you are seeing such an overt action by big money around the world to accumulate physical things. Gold cannot be printed, silver cannot be printed, copper cannot be printed, energy cannot be printed. And I think once people fully understand that hard assets matter so much in an age like this, where for decades markets have been dominated by paper, by leverage, by derivatives, by financial engineering, by narratives, by interventions, by price management, all at the hand of the West. I think we're moving back towards a world where physical supply and demand and trade routes matter a lot more than paper positioning. And when that happens, which it seems to be happening right now, something very important changes. And that is prices begin to, let's say, reconnect with value. And that's a very big deal, Sarah, because, paper markets can suppress price for a long time, but it cannot suppress value forever. And I guess I would just simply say that what is the value of a promise that cannot be kept? And this is why you are seeing things change the way that they are. And there's no better way to disrupt the apple cart than to mess with the global movement of the free-flowing movement of oil and goods and commodities around the globe. And that will definitely have impacts on economies, on the value of currency, just the natural order of things. So yeah, this is, as the Chinese curse says, may you live in interesting times. These are very, very, very interesting times, to say the least.
International trade relies heavily on a network of vital shipping corridors. When these routes become unstable, the entire global supply chain can be affected. One of the most critical choke points is the Strait of Hormuz, through which a significant portion of the world's oil supply travels. Disruptions in such locations can ripple across energy markets, manufacturing, and transportation systems. Even delays in shipping can create shortages and rising prices. Similar concerns have emerged around major waterways like the Panama Canal. When access to these routes becomes uncertain, the cost of moving goods increases, fueling inflation and adding pressure to already fragile economic systems.
100% you are. I mean, look, you go back across ancient civilizations. Gold has never just been a commodity. It's been treated as something transcendent. You go back to ancient Egyptians, it was associated with the divine and the flesh of the gods, and the Inca saw it as the sweat of the sun. In the Hindu and the Buddhist traditions, it's all through it. And it meant enlightenment and prosperity and permanence. Go back into the Greek, into Greek history, and you'll see it belonged in the realm of immortals and gods. And so, maybe it's because it has qualities unlike almost anything else. It doesn't corrode, it doesn't rust, it doesn't tarnish, it doesn't decay, it endures. And I think that is exactly why physical possession matters. And the biggest money in the world has quietly been accumulating it, not just for those qualities, but because I think all global reserve currencies have a life. And it just seems that not only does our currency have a life, but so too does, this hegemony that we have carried for a very long time. And we have, I think, in many respects, it appears to be entering the final stages of this global dominance, this empire that has extended itself.
Let me ask you: are we in the final stages, or are we entering a new stage where they're trying to take over the world in a bigger way? I think we're on like an edge where we're either going to lose it or we're going to be much more dominant. It seems like they're pushing hard and they're risking everything to take over the world. That's what it seems like.
Well, I don't know, to be honest with you. I mean,
do you know what I'm saying, though?
Yes, I do, but part of me feels like they want to become more mercantile, where they worry about here. And that would explain Greenland, that would explain Venezuela, yep. That would explain a lot of things about reshoring and focusing more on...
But what about the Middle East, though? That
is something that, I think that's why there's a lot of people that are upset about this. Is this a place that we should be? The human story of it is sad, and to see what's happening, but is it our place to go in and continue to do this? And I think that's what's getting old for a lot of people. You look at Iraq, and we went there supposedly for humanitarian purposes, but those purposes were a lie. We went there looking for weapons that were not there, and we're still there 23 years later. And look at Afghanistan. It was a nightmare. I mean, you go all the way back to Vietnam. I could argue maybe the only war, every war in my lifetime has been unjust or immoral, or we shouldn't have been a part of, other than World War II, which wasn't my lifetime, you could argue. And when we got out of World War II, the people who fought that war, in my mind, were the greatest generation that ever walked the earth. In terms of, at least here in the United States.
Energy remains the foundation of modern economic activity. When oil supply is threatened, prices can spike rapidly, triggering inflation across multiple industries. A single disruption at major production facilities, such as those operated by Saudi Aramco, can affect global markets almost instantly. Higher energy costs raise transportation expenses, increase manufacturing prices, and ultimately push consumer prices upward. For households, this means more expensive fuel, food, and everyday goods. For governments, it complicates efforts to manage inflation and economic growth. Because energy influences nearly every sector of the economy, instability in oil markets can quickly evolve into broader financial turbulence.
Right, which is forgotten. Not only is it forgotten, we are a country that is completely divisive. We are a country that is not united. We are divided. And we've lost that moral high ground on many, many, many levels. No one trusts our institutions. Very few trust our judicial system, our electoral system, our immigration system, all of these things that made this country great. Meritocracy, how you outwork people rather than your lifestyle, all of this stuff that has been stepped on, trampled on, changed, has decayed, is a function of late stage empires. And so, how do you rule the world when you are as indebted as we are, where the Congressional Budget Office would tell you that, by 2031, every single penny we take in, which is nonpartisan, by the way, Congressional Budget Office, every penny we take in income tax will go just to pay the interest on the debt and those mandatory entitlements that are not even on the balance sheet. How do you continue to police the world the way that we are with a $1.5 trillion defense budget that has to be borrowed? It's discretional. You have to borrow that money in order to rule the world. We are a country, financially, it's a paper tiger. We don't have really the ability to continue to do this financially, and that's the same story you see throughout time. Look at the Roman Empire, same thing. And what did they do? Well, they started running out of money, so they started to clip the edges of the coins. That's why there are ridges on coins, and they started then to debase the metal in it, and anything, which is just another form of inflation. And that's exactly what we see here. We will see much, much higher inflation, but now we're seeing a period of time where, the world doesn't look at us the same way. We're not trusted, all the way from our leadership to our institutions, our markets, everything. And a system built upon a foundation of trust, once you lose that trust, things begin to react violently. And I think it's easy to admit for most people that in many respects, look, we still may pride ourselves of being the greatest country on the planet, but we've lost an awful lot of trust and respect, and I guess we'll see where we go from here. But I would argue things like this don't help the overall narrative even a little bit, globally anyways.
No.
During times of financial uncertainty, investors often revisit assets with intrinsic value. Precious metals such as gold and silver have served this role for thousands of years. Unlike paper currencies or digital assets, these metals cannot be created at will by central banks. Their limited supply and long history as stores of wealth make them appealing during periods of monetary instability. Many central banks have quietly increased their gold reserves in recent years, reflecting concerns about long-term currency stability. As financial markets become more volatile, the debate about the role of tangible assets in protecting wealth is gaining renewed attention.
So we talked about a few weeks ago how Morgan Stanley's chief investment officer said the 60-40 stock bond split that they've used for 50 years, Wall Street has, is broken. Sell half your bonds and buy gold. So that would be 60-20-20. 60 stock, 20 bonds, 20 gold. Michael Hartnett, who is Bank of America's chief analyst, before I tell you what their metals guy said, he came out right after that a month ago or so and said, no, 25% should be in gold. You should have 25 stock, 25 bond, 25 short-term treasury, 25 gold and silver, which is a massive departure from anything any
Yeah, exactly.
Wall Street person said. But now you have Bank of America making one of the boldest silver calls I've ever seen, and this is from Michael Widmer. He is their head of metals research. And he says silver could reach anywhere between 135 and 309 by the end of this year. And he talks about it relating to the gold to silver ratio, etc., whatever it means, whatever story he is using. To me, it's most importantly a stress in the system story, because what he had talked about was that one of the things that would lead silver to do this would be things that we are seeing right now, which is kind of crazy. He's talking about silver rises because not just because gold rises, but that silver rises because of perhaps an environment where there are more delivery requests than there is silver available. Well, that's what we saw this entire month. Just to give you an example, the month of February, which, they worked down the open interest for the March contrast in a very disorderly way, because I don't care what anyone says. I read something before I finish my thought there, I read something on X where this was just a normal drawdown in open interest, orderly the way they always do it. My ass it was right there.
The world economy may be entering a period of structural transition. Rising government debt, geopolitical tensions, and shifting alliances are challenging the financial order that has dominated since the end of World War II. Trust in institutions and currencies plays a critical role in maintaining economic stability, yet that trust appears increasingly fragile. As global power dynamics evolve, investors, governments, and financial institutions are reassessing how they manage risk. Whether through diversification, commodities, or strategic reserves, many are preparing for a future that may look very different from the economic environment of the past several decades.